My name is Madison Reed. I'm 32 years old, and 1 week ago, at what was supposed to be a casual family dinner at my sister's house, Courtney slapped me hard across the face, physically shoved me out her front door, and screamed, "Get out of my house!" while our parents Roger and Linda sat at the dining table watching silently as I stumbled into the front yard bruised and humiliated. What made this assault even more devastating was that I'd been quietly paying Courtney's $2,800 monthly mortgage for the past 2 years to prevent her from losing the house to foreclosure after she lost her job, and she had no idea that the home she was violently throwing me out of was only hers because of my financial support. I'm a successful architect here in Portland, Oregon, and for 2 years I've been sacrificing my own savings and financial goals to protect my sister from the consequences of her unemployment and poor financial decisions, while she's been treating me with increasing hostility and resentment at every family gathering as if my presence was an inconvenience, rather than the reason she still had a roof over her head. The violence that erupted during that family dinner wasn't sudden or unprovoked in Courtney's mind. It was the culmination of 2 years of her blaming me for everything wrong in her life while refusing to acknowledge her own responsibility for the financial crisis that had required my intervention in the first place. But from my perspective, the assault was shocking because despite her verbal hostility toward me over the years, I never imagined she would escalate to physical violence or that our parents would sit there watching their daughter attack their other daughter without intervening or defending me in any way. The realization that my family would allow me to be physically assaulted without caring enough to stop it was almost more painful than the assault itself, because it revealed exactly how little my well-being mattered to people who should have loved and protected me. Have you ever been violently expelled from property you've been secretly financing, while the people who should have defended you watched silently and did nothing? That's exactly what I experienced when Courtney's hands connected with my face and then my chest as she shoved me toward the door, while Roger and Linda remained seated at the dinner table, as if witnessing their daughter being assaulted was just normal family dynamics that didn't require their intervention or concern. Growing up in our Portland family, Courtney and I had always had a complicated relationship characterized by her tendency to blame others for her problems, while positioning herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. From childhood through our adult years, Courtney had demonstrated a pattern of making poor decisions and then resenting anyone who tried to help her deal with the consequences. When she struggled academically in high school, she blamed her teachers for not explaining concepts clearly, rather than acknowledging that she hadn't put in the study time necessary to succeed. When she was fired from her first job out of college for chronic lateness and poor performance, she blamed her supervisor for having unrealistic expectations rather than taking responsibility for her own workplace behavior. The pattern continued throughout her 20s, with each setback or difficulty being attributed to external factors or other people's failures, rather than her own choices and actions. When she couldn't maintain friendships, she blamed other people for being unsupportive rather than examining her own behavior in relationships. When she struggled financially, despite having a decent salary, she blamed the cost of living and economic conditions rather than her spending habits and lack of budgeting discipline. Our parents, Roger and Linda, had always enabled this victim mentality by sympathizing with her complaints and never holding her accountable for the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, I had taken a completely different approach to life and challenges, accepting responsibility for my outcomes and working hard to build a successful career as an architect. I'd put myself through college and graduate school, developed expertise in sustainable architectural design, and built a reputation in Portland's competitive architecture community that led to steady work and increasing professional recognition. By the time I was 30, I had established myself as a respected architect with a growing client base and financial stability that allowed me to save for my future while maintaining a comfortable lifestyle. As a woman in the male-dominated architecture field, I'd had to work twice as hard to prove my competence and earn respect from colleagues and clients who sometimes dismissed my expertise or questioned my authority. The challenges I'd overcome to establish my career made Courtney's victim narrative particularly frustrating, because I knew firsthand that success required taking ownership of your circumstances and working persistently toward your goals despite obstacles and setbacks. 2 years ago, Courtney lost her job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company after what she described as personality conflicts with her supervisor, but what I later learned involved multiple warnings about her work performance and attitude. Without her salary, she immediately fell behind on her mortgage payments for the house she'd purchased 3 years earlier, during a period when she was employed and optimistic about her financial future. Rather than immediately looking for new employment or developing a plan to address her financial situation, Courtney spent months complaining about how unfair her firing had been and how impossible the job market was, while her mortgage arrears accumulated and foreclosure proceedings began. Our parents were aware of her financial crisis, but lacked the resources to help her maintain her mortgage payments, having their own limited retirement income and financial obligations. When they told me about Courtney's situation and the possibility that she might lose her house, I made a decision that I now recognize was both generous and foolish. I offered to quietly make her mortgage payments until she found new employment and could resume paying them herself. My thinking was that foreclosure would destroy her credit and make it nearly impossible for her to purchase another home in the future, and that temporary assistance during her unemployment would give her time to find a new job without the added stress of losing her housing. I structured the arrangement so that Courtney wouldn't know the payments were coming from me, because I knew from past experience that accepting help from me would trigger her resentment and victim mentality. I contacted her mortgage company and arranged to have the payments made directly from my account, with the statements sent to my address rather than hers. This way, Courtney would see that her mortgage was being paid and wouldn't face foreclosure, but she wouldn't know that I was the source of the assistance. I assumed she would believe the mortgage company had granted her some kind of forbearance or payment plan, and that she would use the breathing room to find employment and get her finances back on track. The monthly payment of $2,800 represented a significant portion of my income and required me to make substantial sacrifices in my own financial planning and lifestyle choices. I postponed plans to purchase my own home, reduced my retirement contributions, and cut back on discretionary spending to ensure I could maintain both my own expenses and Courtney's mortgage payments. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, maybe 6 months while she found a new job, but it ended up lasting 2 full years as Courtney's unemployment stretched on far longer than anyone expected. During those 2 years, instead of appreciating the mysterious assistance that was keeping her housed, Courtney became increasingly bitter and hostile toward me specifically. At family gatherings, she would make snide comments about my career success and financial stability, implying that I was privileged or lucky rather than hardworking and responsible. She would criticize my lifestyle choices, my priorities, and my values, as if my success was somehow an insult to her struggles. She blamed me for not helping her find architecture clients who might need marketing services, as if I was obligated to use my professional network to solve her employment problems. "Madison lives in her perfect little architect world while the rest of us struggle," she would say during family dinners. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you while some of us have to deal with real problems and unfair situations." The irony of her complaining about my privileged life while living in a house that I was paying for was almost unbearable, but I couldn't defend myself without revealing that I was the one keeping her from foreclosure. The jealousy dynamic between sisters added another layer of complexity to our relationship, because Courtney had always resented any achievement or recognition I received. When I graduated from architecture school with honors, she'd dismissed it as book smarts that don't translate to the real world. When I landed my first major design project, she'd suggested I'd only gotten it because the client wanted to appear progressive by hiring a female architect. Her inability to celebrate my successes while expecting everyone to sympathize with her failures created a toxic family dynamic that our parents consistently enabled. Our parents never corrected Courtney's hostile attitude toward me, or pointed out that her real problems were largely self-created through poor decisions and lack of effort in finding new employment. They would nod sympathetically when she complained about the job market or about how hard her life was, while ignoring the fact that she was making minimal effort to improve her situation. They treated her unemployment as something that was happening to her, rather than something she was allowing to continue by not aggressively pursuing new opportunities. Meanwhile, I was working 50 to 60 hours per week at my architecture firm, taking on additional freelance projects to earn extra income to cover Courtney's mortgage, and sacrificing my own financial goals and plans to protect her from consequences she deserved to face. The stress of maintaining this double financial burden while watching Courtney resent me for my success was exhausting and demoralizing. But I continued the payments because I believed I was doing the right thing for my sister and preventing a catastrophic outcome that would affect her for decades. The situation became more difficult as the months turned into years, and Courtney showed no signs of finding employment or taking her job search seriously. She would claim to be applying for positions, but her efforts seemed half-hearted, and her expectations unrealistic, given her employment history and skills. She wanted a job that paid more than her previous position, despite being unemployed for an extended period, and she rejected opportunities that she deemed beneath her or not aligned with her career goals. Her sense of entitlement and her refusal to accept that she might need to take a less-than-ideal position to restart her career prevented her from making progress toward financial independence. Meanwhile, her hostility toward me continued to escalate with each family gathering, as if my success and stability were personal affronts that justified her increasing verbal attacks. She would criticize the architecture projects I was working on, dismissing my work as designing buildings for rich people, as if creating sustainable and functional spaces wasn't valuable or meaningful. She would mock my dedication to my career, suggesting that I was a workaholic with no life outside my job, conveniently ignoring that my extra work hours were funding her housing expenses. The gender dynamics also played into her resentment, because as sisters, we were constantly compared by extended family members who would comment on our different life paths. Courtney was single and struggling professionally, while I was successful in my career, despite also being single. She seemed to interpret my professional success as judgment of her failures, when in reality I was working to support both of our housing situations without any recognition or appreciation. Our parents' response to Courtney's hostility was always to make excuses for her behavior and suggest that I should be more understanding of her difficult situation. "Your sister is going through a hard time right now," my mother Linda would say, whenever I expressed frustration with Courtney's attitude. "You need to be patient with her, and remember that not everyone has had your opportunities and advantages." The suggestion that my success was due to advantages rather than hard work was insulting, and the complete lack of accountability for Courtney's choices and behavior was enabling her victim mentality and hostility. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Courtney's house 3 weeks ago, when her verbal attacks escalated to a level that I couldn't ignore or tolerate any longer. The dinner was supposed to be a casual Sunday meal with our parents and a few extended family members, including our aunt and uncle. I arrived on time bringing a bottle of wine and dessert, trying to be a good guest despite the hostile environment I knew I would encounter based on past gatherings. From the moment I walked in the door, Courtney's attitude was cold and unwelcoming, as if my presence was an inconvenience rather than a normal part of family dinner. Throughout the meal, she made several pointed comments about people who have money and those of us who actually struggle, directing her remarks at me even though I was sitting right there at her table eating the meal she'd prepared. When our father Roger mentioned an architecture project he'd read about in the newspaper, Courtney immediately interjected with sarcastic comments about how architects were overpaid and out of touch with regular people's needs. "It must be so nice to sit in an office designing fancy buildings while some of us can't even find work," she said, her voice dripping with resentment. "The world doesn't need more expensive architecture. It needs jobs for people like me who are willing to work but can't get hired because the economy is terrible and employers are unfair." The victim narrative was so deeply embedded in her worldview that she genuinely seemed to believe that her unemployment was entirely due to external circumstances rather than her own choices and limitations. I tried to change the subject and steer the conversation toward neutral topics, but Courtney seemed determined to continue attacking me throughout the evening. When I mentioned a recent hiking trip I'd taken, she made dismissive comments about people who had time and money for recreational activities while others were struggling to survive. When I shared news about a sustainable housing project my firm was designing, she accused me of working for developers who were driving up housing costs and making life harder for working-class people. The accumulation of attacks throughout the dinner was exhausting and hurtful, But what finally triggered the physical violence was a comment I made about the housing market. Our uncle had asked me about home buying advice for his daughter who was looking to purchase her first property, and I was explaining some basic considerations about mortgages and down payments when Courtney exploded with rage. "Madison thinks she knows everything about housing because she's successful and has money," she shouted, her face flushed with anger. "She has no idea what it's like for people who actually struggle with housing costs and mortgage payments. She sits there in her perfect life judging everyone else's financial decisions, while some of us are barely keeping our homes and dealing with real financial stress." The irony of Courtney lecturing me about housing costs while sitting in a house that I'd been paying for was too much to bear silently any longer. "Courtney, I think you're being unfair," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I work hard for my success, and I don't judge other people's financial situations. Everyone faces different challenges, and I try to be understanding and supportive of family members who need help." That's when everything changed in an instant. Courtney stood up from her chair so violently that it scraped across the floor, her face contorted with rage and something else, maybe years of accumulated resentment and jealousy that had finally found an outlet. "You don't understand anything," she screamed, moving toward me with alarming speed. "You've never struggled a day in your life. You walk around acting like you're so much better than everyone else with your fancy architecture career and your perfect life." Before I could respond or even fully process what was happening, Courtney's hand connected with my face in a sharp slap that echoed through the dining room. The pain was immediate and shocking, radiating across my cheek and bringing tears to my eyes from both the physical impact and the emotional devastation of being assaulted by my own sister. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand instinctively moving to my burning cheek, trying to comprehend that Courtney had actually hit me. But the violence didn't stop with the slap. While I was still processing the shock of being struck, Courtney put both hands on my chest and shoved me hard toward the front door. I stumbled backward, my feet struggling to maintain balance as she continued pushing me across the living room. "Get out of my house!" she screamed, her voice filled with venom and rage. "Get out! I don't want you here. You're not welcome in my home." I looked desperately toward our parents, hoping they would intervene and stop Courtney's assault. But Roger and Linda remained seated at the dining table as if they were watching a television show rather than witnessing their daughter physically attacking their other daughter. My father's face was pale and uncomfortable, but he said nothing. My mother looked distressed but made no move to help me or stop Courtney. Our aunt and uncle also remained silent, frozen in their seats as if unsure how to respond to the violence unfolding before them. Courtney shoved me again, harder this time, and I felt myself stumbling through the front door that she'd pulled open. My ankle twisted as I tried to catch myself, and I fell onto the front porch, scraping my hands on the rough concrete as I tried to break my fall. The pain in my palms joined the throbbing in my face and ankle as I lay there stunned and humiliated in front of my sister's house. "Don't come back," Courtney yelled from the doorway, her chest heaving with exertion and rage. "This is my house, and you're not welcome here. Stay out of my life." She slammed the door so hard that it rattled in its frame, leaving me alone on the porch, bruised and shocked by what had just happened. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process the physical and emotional trauma of the assault, while also grappling with the devastating realization that my parents had watched the entire attack without intervening to protect me. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the pain in my heart, as I understood that my family valued keeping peace with Courtney over defending me from violence. I had been paying Courtney's mortgage for 2 years, sacrificing my own financial goals to keep her housed, and her gratitude was to physically assault me and throw me out of the house that only existed in her possession because of my secret support. As I slowly stood up and walked to my car, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door, I made a decision that would change everything. Courtney had violently expelled me from property I'd been financing. My parents had enabled her abuse by doing nothing to stop it, and I was done protecting people who would watch me be assaulted without caring enough to intervene. The drive home from Courtney's house was one of the longest of my life, even though the actual distance was only about 15 minutes. My face throbbed where she'd slapped me. My hands stung from the scrapes on the concrete, and my ankle ached from the twist it had suffered when I fell. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of replaying the scene in my mind. Courtney's hand striking my face, her hands shoving me, her voice screaming at me to get out, and my parents sitting silently at the table watching their daughter assault their other daughter. When I arrived home, I immediately took photographs of my injuries, the red mark on my face where Courtney had slapped me, the scrapes on my palms, the swelling around my ankle. I documented everything carefully, understanding that I would need evidence of the assault for the legal actions I was planning to take. I also wrote down everything that had happened while the details were fresh in my memory, creating a detailed account of the evening that would be useful for police reports and potential legal proceedings. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Courtney's rage-filled face and felt her hands on my chest shoving me toward the door. I heard her voice screaming, "Get out of my house," and saw my parents sitting silently, doing nothing to protect me. The betrayal wasn't just from Courtney's violence. It was from my entire family's complicity in that violence through their silence and inaction. But as the night progressed and my shock began to give way to clear thinking, I started to understand the full scope of the situation and the power I actually held. Courtney had assaulted me and expelled me from her house, a house that was only hers because I'd been paying the mortgage for 2 years. She had no idea that every month for 24 months, $2,800 had left my bank account and gone directly to her mortgage company, preventing foreclosure and keeping her housed. She believed she'd somehow managed to maintain her mortgage payments despite being unemployed, or that some mysterious forbearance or assistance program was keeping her afloat. The realization that Courtney had violently thrown me out of property I was secretly financing transformed my devastation into strategic clarity. She had assaulted me while living in a house she couldn't afford. My parents had enabled that assault by doing nothing to stop it. And all of them were about to learn exactly who had been providing the financial foundation for Courtney's continued housing security. Over the next few days, I consulted with attorneys about my options regarding both the assault and the financial situation with Courtney's mortgage. The assault was straightforward. I had physical evidence of injury, witness accounts, however unwilling those witnesses might be to testify honestly, and clear documentation of what had occurred. I could press charges for assault and potentially pursue a civil claim for damages related to the attack. The mortgage situation was more complex but equally powerful. I had been making voluntary payments on someone else's property for 2 years, with documentation proving every payment had come from my accounts. While I couldn't force Courtney to sell her house or transfer ownership to me since my name wasn't on the title, I could certainly stop making payments and allow the natural consequences of her unemployment and financial irresponsibility to proceed. Without my $2,800 monthly payments, Courtney would immediately fall behind on her mortgage and face foreclosure within 60 days. My attorney explained that I had no legal obligation to continue making Courtney's mortgage payments, and that I was well within my rights to stop the payments at any time. She also explained that the documentation I had showing 2 years of payments would be valuable in demonstrating the hypocrisy and irony of Courtney assaulting me and expelling me from property I was financing. "The optics of this situation are powerful," my attorney said. "Your sister physically attacked you and threw you out of a house that you've been secretly paying for. That's not just assault. That's profound ingratitude and betrayal that goes beyond typical family conflict." I also consulted with a real estate attorney about the implications of stopping my payments and allowing Courtney's house to go into foreclosure. They explained the timeline for foreclosure proceedings in Oregon, the notices that Courtney would receive, and the eventual outcome if she couldn't resume making payments. The process would take several months, giving Courtney time to either find employment and take over the payments or sell the house before foreclosure proceedings were completed. 1 week after the assault, I prepared a comprehensive package of documents that would be delivered to Courtney's house. The package included 1. Copies of 24 months of bank statements showing my payments to her mortgage company. 2. A letter explaining that I had been making her mortgage payments for 2 years to prevent her from losing her home. 3. Official notice that I was immediately stopping all payments and that she would need to resume making her own payments or face foreclosure. 4. Documentation of the assault including photographs of my injuries and a written account of what had occurred. 5. Information about the assault charges I was filing with the police department. 6. a restraining order application that would legally prohibit Courtney from coming near me or contacting me. The letter I wrote to accompany these documents was direct and unemotional. Courtney, for the past 2 years, I have been making your $2,800 monthly mortgage payments to prevent you from losing your house to foreclosure. During this time, I sacrificed my own savings and financial goals to protect you from the consequences of your unemployment. You were not aware of my financial support because I structured the payments to appear as if they were coming directly from a forbearance or assistance program rather than from me personally. Last week, you physically assaulted me, slapping my face and shoving me out of your house while screaming at me to get out. Our parents and extended family members watched this assault occur and did nothing to intervene or protect me. You expelled me from your house, a house that has only remained in your possession because of my financial support. Effective immediately, I am stopping all mortgage payments. You will need to resume making your own payments or face foreclosure proceedings. I am also pressing assault charges and obtaining a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting me or coming near me. I hope that losing the house I saved will teach you about gratitude, accountability, and the consequences of violence. I arranged for the package to be delivered to Courtney's house by certified mail, requiring her signature to confirm receipt. I wanted there to be no ambiguity about when she received the information and when she learned that her financial security was about to disappear. The day the package was delivered, I turned off my phone for several hours, knowing that once Courtney and my parents realized what was happening, they would begin calling frantically. When I finally turned my phone back on that evening, I found 45 missed calls and dozens of text messages, all expressing various combinations of panic, denial, anger, and desperate pleas. My mother's voicemails were particularly frantic. "Madison, please call me back immediately. There's been a terrible mistake. Courtney didn't know you were paying her mortgage. You can't just stop the payments. She'll lose her house. Please, we need to talk about this." My father's messages were more subdued but equally urgent. "Madison, your mother and I didn't realize you were helping Courtney financially. We need to discuss this situation as a family. Please call us back so we can work something out." Courtney's messages alternated between rage and desperation. "You fucking bitch. You've been secretly paying my mortgage and now you're trying to use that against me? You can't do this. This is my house." Followed by, "Madison, please. I'm sorry about what happened at dinner. I was upset and I overreacted. You can't let me lose my house because of one mistake." The characterization of physically assaulting me as one mistake or overreacting revealed that Courtney still didn't understand the severity of what she'd done or the consequences she was about to face. And the desperate attempts by my parents to mediate and work something out showed that they still didn't grasp that their failure to intervene during the assault had destroyed my willingness to continue supporting Courtney financially. I didn't respond to any of the calls or messages that first day. I wanted my family to sit with the reality of the situation without any hope that I might change my mind or continue supporting Courtney. They needed to understand that actions have consequences, that violence against family members is unacceptable, and that people who enable that violence don't get to demand continued generosity from the victim. Over the next few days, the messages continued relentlessly. My parents tried every approach they could think of: guilt, anger, bargaining, promises that Courtney would apologize, suggestions that family therapy could resolve our conflict. Courtney's messages ranged from threats of legal action, which my attorney assured me were baseless, to tearful apologies that rang hollow given their timing. But the message that revealed the most about my family's values came from my mother 3 days after the package was delivered. "Madison, I know Courtney hurt you, but she's your sister and she needs you. You're successful and financially stable. You don't need that money as much as she needs that house. Can't you be the bigger person and continue helping her until she gets back on her feet? Family is supposed to help family, especially when one person has resources and the other person is struggling." The message crystallized everything that was wrong with my family's dynamics. According to my mother, my success meant I was obligated to support Courtney despite her violence, while Courtney's failure meant she was entitled to my financial support without any accountability for her behavior. Being the bigger person apparently meant allowing myself to be assaulted, and then continuing to pay the mortgage on the house I'd been expelled from. And Family helping family only seemed to flow in one direction, from me to Courtney, without any reciprocal support, appreciation, or even basic respect. 2 weeks after stopping the mortgage payments, Courtney received her first notice from the mortgage company informing her that her account was overdue and that she needed to bring the account current immediately to avoid foreclosure proceedings. This notice was followed by frantic calls from Courtney and my parents, all expressing shock that the mortgage company was demanding payment and asking me to resume the payments, just until Courtney can figure things out. The phrase, "just until Courtney can figure things out," was particularly infuriating because that was exactly what I'd told myself 2 years ago when I started making her mortgage payments. The temporary assistance had turned into 2 years of sacrifice that had only ended when Courtney physically attacked me. There was no reason to believe that any future assistance would be temporary, and there was certainly no reason to continue supporting someone who had responded to my generosity with violence. 1 month after stopping the payments, I finally responded to my family's messages with a simple text, "Get out one now." The 3 words echoed Courtney's command to me during the assault, but now they applied to her situation. She needed to get out of the house I had been financing before foreclosure forced her out involuntarily. The response was immediate and explosive. Courtney called me screaming, "You can't do this to me. This is my house. I've lived here for 6 years. You can't just take it away from me." The lack of self-awareness was stunning. She was accusing me of taking away something that had only remained hers because of my financial support, as if I had somehow wronged her by stopping payments on property I had no legal obligation to maintain. My mother's response was similarly oblivious to the actual dynamics of the situation. "Madison, you're being cruel and vindictive. Courtney made a mistake, but you're punishing her by taking away her home. How can you do something so heartless to your own sister?" The framing of my decision to stop paying someone else's mortgage as cruel and heartless after that person had assaulted me revealed the complete lack of accountability my parents had for Courtney's behavior. But I remained firm in my decision, and my attorney advised me not to engage in extended conversations about the situation. "You've made your decision clear," she said. "Continuing to debate or justify your choice only gives them ammunition to try to manipulate you into changing your mind. Stay strong and let the natural consequences proceed." The assault charges moved forward through the legal system, with police reports filed and court dates scheduled. Courtney tried to minimize the assault by claiming it was a family argument that got out of hand, rather than a serious act of violence, but the photographs of my injuries and the testimony from witnesses who had seen the attack contradicted her version of events. The criminal case proceeded slowly, as most assault cases do, but the very fact that charges were filed sent a message to my family that violence had consequences. Courtney faced the possibility of a criminal conviction, probation, anger management classes, and a permanent record that would affect her future employment prospects. Meanwhile, the foreclosure proceedings on her house moved forward inexorably. 60 days after I stopped making payments, the mortgage company began formal foreclosure proceedings. Courtney received official notices about the foreclosure timeline, the amount she needed to pay to reinstate the mortgage, and the eventual auction date if she couldn't bring the account current. My parents tried desperately to help Courtney avoid losing the house, but their limited retirement income couldn't cover the accumulated arrears plus ongoing monthly payments. They approached me multiple times asking if I would accept repayment over time if I would just save the house from foreclosure, but I refused all negotiations. "Courtney assaulted me and expelled me from property I was financing," I told them. "The consequence is that she loses the property. That's not punishment. That's reality." 4 months after I stopped making payments, Courtney's house was sold at foreclosure auction. She had to vacate the property and find new housing, which proved difficult given her lack of employment, damaged credit, and limited financial resources. She ended up moving back in with our parents, which created tensions in their household, as they struggled to support her financially and emotionally while also dealing with their own disappointment and frustration about the situation. The loss of her house was devastating to Courtney, but it also forced her to finally confront the reality of her situation and make changes she should have made 2 years earlier. Within weeks of losing her house, She accepted a marketing position that paid less than her previous job, but provided income and benefits. The desperation of her housing crisis apparently motivated her to accept opportunities she'd previously rejected as beneath her standards. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but gradually evolved as they began to understand the full scope of what had happened. My father eventually acknowledged that they should have intervened during the assault and that their silence had been wrong. I was shocked and didn't know how to respond, he admitted during one of our difficult conversations. But that's not an excuse. We should have protected you, and I'm sorry we didn't. Mano? My mother took longer to acknowledge any wrongdoing, continuing to focus on Courtney's housing loss rather than the assault that had precipitated my decision to stop supporting her financially. But eventually, she too admitted that they had failed me. I didn't realize how much you were doing for Courtney, she said, and I didn't realize how badly she was treating you while you were helping her. I'm sorry we didn't see what was happening and didn't defend you when you needed us. Today, I live in a house I purchased with the money I saved by no longer paying Courtney's mortgage. The home is entirely mine, financed through my own work and success, without any complications or obligations to family members who proved they didn't deserve my generosity or sacrifice. My family is permanently banned from my property, which feels appropriate given that Courtney banned me from property I was financing. The lesson I learned from this experience is that people who physically assault you while living off your financial support deserve to lose both your money and the property it secured. Sometimes the best response to being violently expelled from property is to make sure the person who expelled you gets expelled from that property permanently. And sometimes the most important boundary you can set with abusive family members is to stop protecting them from consequences they richly deserve to face. If this story resonated with you and you believe that people who assault you while benefiting from your financial support deserve to lose that support and face consequences for their violence, please hit that subscribe button to Sweet Revenge Diaries. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that generosity doesn't require you to accept abuse, and family relationships don't obligate you to fund the housing of people who physically attack you. See you in our next story.